Hey there, my name's Jordyn, and I'm a financial coach and financial planner. And today I'm your host at the Reimagine Wealth podcast, where we share imperfect stories about embodying our values, weaving just system level safety nets, and working to build the world that we want to live in, one where we all get to have our needs met and thrive. Let these be shared learnings that allow you to more deeply explore, experiment, and shift, and that allow us to unlock our collective knowledge. This show is ad-free and available to everyone, and it wouldn't be possible without your love and support. So if you like what you're listening to, please like, review, subscribe, and share the show with those in your community. If you're able, please support my work to produce the show by becoming a paid member of my Substack, which starts at $6 a month. Link to that and more is in the show notes. Thank you so much for listening. And now let's get into the show.
Okay, so today you are going to hear my own money story and a little bit about how money has moved through my life, how it's really shaped my own values, and how I got into what I'm doing now. So my money story began when I was born, and I was born at a time when my parents were both in school. Actually, my mom had graduated with a bachelor's degree and was teaching elementary school and was also working side jobs to support my dad and her financially as my dad was going to law school. And although throughout the course of my family legacy, there have been periods over the last several hundreds of years, there have been periods where my family was wealthy. There have been periods where my family did not have access to wealth. And so my mom's side of the family really came from a very working class household. My grandma on my mom's side was a homemaker. My grandpa was a mailman who was previously in the military and who benefited from things like the GI Bill, which made housing much more accessible and affordable for those who had served. And at the same time, it was still difficult to meet everyone's basic needs on the salary of a mailman. And my mom had 3 other siblings as well. She was the youngest and the only biological child of my grandfather. And so a lot of the stories that I heard growing up were stories of how when they would go out to eat, going out to eat was going to get a meal from the hospital cafe. And on my dad's side, he came from a family that fractured when he was quite young. He was 3 or 4 years old when his parents divorced. His mom struggles with having bipolar disorder. And at the time, that went unmedicated. And my dad learned coping mechanisms to deal with what was happening at home, moved around a lot. His mom ended up being in relationships with not a lot of financial stability, and actually to this day has gone through bankruptcy and gets financial support from my parents. So the context of all of that is to say that my parents came from a place where there was a lot of financial stress, and particularly when I was born, they were not in a financially stable situation. I entered the world and I lived in student housing with them during my first year or two. We rented. I wore some really cute outfits that my grandma made. I specifically remember my horse outfit and my dolphin outfit and feeling like I was the hottest kid in school. And that was when I was about like 4 or 5 years old. And things started shifting as my dad finished law school, became more successful, and eventually, throughout the course of my own childhood, we ascended classes. My dad became a leader at his law firm. He ended up working very high-paying jobs, and through that was able to provide a very different lifestyle than what he grew up with or what my mom grew up with. And at the same time, that financial stress never really went away. I do remember when my parents bought their first home. It was what typically might be called a starter home. And then when I was in like 5th or 6th grade, we ended up moving into a different neighborhood, and that was the first time I lived in a home where all of us could have our own individual rooms. I do remember the different feeling of the neighborhood that I grew up in versus this new place where there was just something different in the sense of friendliness and like openness to conversation, openness to connection. That could have also been because I was like a preteen, so that might have something to do with it. But I do distinctly remember I never talked to our next door neighbors that lived to the right of us to this day. I never remember talking to them or conversing with them. And the other things that really stood out to me during that time, I remember my parents were able to pay for the lease of my first car. And that was something that many people around me did not have access to. A lot of people were not able, even though they had their license, did not have access to their own transportation, obviously because of the cost of that. And the car was probably the first time that I started to notice, like, oh, what's true for me and what's possible is not possible for a lot of people. Or they're not getting a new car, they're getting a hand-me-down car, or a car is completely out of the picture. And I noticed that also happened when I went to college. I was able to have my parents financially support me through college by paying for the cost of my tuition and my books and my rent. And most of the people I knew were not. They were working other jobs. It was very unusual, and I felt like I needed to hide the fact that I was getting that from my parents. And so that was something that just sat with me and created this cognitive dissonance, but I really wasn't sure what to do with it. And that college experience was what enabled me to get an internship out in California working in the tech sector. And I was, as an intern, this is still wild to me because this was 2015. As an intern, I was making $30 an hour. This is a time when minimum wage was somewhere around $7 to $8 an hour. I just remember thinking, wow, I am making so much money, and they were covering the cost of my housing. So I came back from that internship being like, okay, great. I have made enough that I can actually cover the cost of my tuition this year. And I remember saying that to my dad, being like, hey, I got this. I want to cover it. And he was like, no, we got you. Don't worry about it. Use that for something else. And in my mind, that did clarify to me. I was like, oh, this whole time I thought my parents were denying themselves certain things in order to provide for myself. And I think it clicked for me then of, oh, okay, like you all are financially doing well. My parents did end up paying that final semester, which allowed me to finish my master's degree. And that was what enabled me to get a high-paying job in the tech sector and move to Austin, Texas, where I was making $80,000 a year right out of school. And I just remember thinking, wow, I don't think this anymore, but at the time I was thinking, wow, I must be really great, talented, special, insert adjective of your choice. There must be something unique and special about me that made it so that I could get this job. And that's not to say I am hardworking, I am smart, I have great qualities, I have great skills, and I can look back now and recognize, oh, it was my class privilege that really enabled me to, one, achieve this opportunity, and then two, as I started that job, save as much money as I was able to, because I didn't have loans. I didn't have debt that I was paying off. I was able to put my money where I wanted it to go, which went towards savings. It went towards fun trips. It went towards things that a lot of people just aren't able to access. And through my master's degree, I was actually able to learn negotiation skills that really helped me as I entered the workforce, being able to know how to negotiate my salary, even having the knowledge to negotiate a salary and not just accept what's given, but to know that there is actually a degree of power that I have and that I know how to ask for what I want. I learned how to mask and navigate the world of business which really looked like me adopting more masculine qualities to be perceived as more intelligent or more powerful. And over time, over 8 to 10 years in the workforce, I was making $150,000. And at the same time, there was different events in my life that were really politicizing me. One of them was when Trayvon Martin was murdered. Another was when Donald Trump was elected as president the first time. Another was when I looked at what was in my 401k account and in a brokerage account that I had hired this financial planner, this guy at Edward Jones. You can tell that I was not connecting the dots between economic justice and my own wealth. I was having someone from Edward Jones manage my account. But anyway, looked and saw that I was invested in fossil fuels. And as someone who had been, as a child, I was harassing people to recycle. My whole life, I was really involved as an environmentalist. And I just remember being like, wow, I really feel like I am undoing all of my work that I'm doing in the community. I was also moving from being more of an environmentalist, moving towards climate justice, and really beginning to see how intersectionality comes into play and how climate justice is immigration justice, is housing justice, is language justice, and just how all of these different movements are so interconnected. And I've really started becoming much more aware and involved as an activist in my mid-20s, I would say. Around 2020 timeframe was when I joined this group called the Sunrise Movement, which is a youth-led climate justice group. And I co-led that for a couple years in Austin. As I was doing that, there were some really significant events in my life that were happening. The first was Winter Storm Uri, which happened in 2021. I remember the night before the storm, which completely took out the Texas grid, I slept over at my partner's place. We were not living together at the time. And I slept over not knowing that I would not be able to get back home for a week. I had no clean clothes. I was not able to drive. I was not able to get to my roommates or to my pet. We were fortunate enough that the home that my partner owns was connected to a hospital line. So unlike most of Texas, we actually maintained access to power, although we did lose access to water and we're boiling snow to get our toilets flushed to be able to cook. We were able to connect to the grid. So during that time, I actually ended up coordinating mutual aid across Texas and working to get things like food, water drops, transportation to warming shelters, different resources, also taking in donations and redistributing that out to groups that were doing frontline mutual aid work. I was coordinating all of that because I was able to use my laptop and use my phone. And so I really vividly remember how the Austin community came together to take care of each other, to share resources like food, water, transportation, money, and how people from across the country, total strangers, as well as local businesses, neighbors, friends, all came together to take care of each other. This was also way before there was a COVID vaccine. We ended up having people come and stay in our home in order to stay warm. And that really opened my eyes to what happens in a climate catastrophe in the wake of a disaster and how it really is the people around you, your local community, your neighbors, that come together to take care of each other way before the state ever responds. And how even despite that, the state usually does not take preventative action to even fix the thing that caused the problem in the first place. So it really disillusioned me to the fact that like someone else is going to come and save us. It was like, no, that somebody is me, that somebody is the person next door to me, that somebody is my friend, that somebody is the business owner that lives down the street. We are here for each other and we are going to get through this together. The other thing that happened also in 2021, so this all happened within a couple months of each other, is that I, for a very temporary period of time, it actually was not a very long period of time, someone that I love was unexpectedly hit by a tow truck that ran a red light during a social bike ride event. And they also lost someone who they loved very dearly. So that was a time where I was coordinating with their sibling and some of our other relatives to provide caregiving support. And the other thing that made this more complicated is that they did not have health insurance. They had actually just graduated, were not actively employed. It was a couple days after graduation, and so did not have healthcare coverage. And so that really influenced the way that doctors treated us. We were viewed more as disposable, not believable. It really shifted the conditions of care. And so I became very up close and personal with the underbelly of our late stage capitalist system, particularly within the healthcare industry. And I learned how hard you have to advocate for yourself and for those that you love when talking to a healthcare professional. I also learned how to get someone on Medicaid, get access to government services, and I quickly learned all of the hoops that you have to jump through just to be able to meet your basic needs, and how actually these programs maintain poverty because of the income eligibility limits being so low. And at the same time, I also saw the community fundraise hundreds of thousands of dollars for those who were hit in the collision. I saw community members come out and support us with meals that they cooked, with dog walks that they provided, with emotional support and checking in, with ride shares that were coordinated. And one group even built a deck with donated materials so that we could get the wheelchair to and from the driveway, because otherwise it was stairs and gravel. I was seeing these two different worlds, like one where community really comes together to take care of each other and support each other, and this other where this healthcare industry is just, how can we get you out of here as quick as possible because you are not profitable for us. And the golden thread between both the winter storm and this really devastating situation with my loved one is that these were two events that happened in the time of crises. And in both situations, it was the community, not the state, that brought things back to life. When we need to ask for help, it's the people that we know and the people that we trust that we go to first. And that's true whether it's hurricanes, whether it's gun violence, failed infrastructure, death, tornadoes, assault, interpersonal violence, mudslides, wildfires, floods, grief, the violence of the empire, like all of these crises. It's always our communities that hold us first. And I also was able to see how that level of community support is not sustainable and how things do fall apart, especially when finances get brought into the equation. Because the funds that were raised, it eventually became disputed how those funds should be allocated, who is the most deserving of them, and who even gets to decide that. So I actually got to see how the power of those most directly impacted was actually stripped away, and it was not given to them to make the decision, but actually ended up being a decision that got settled in court many years later. All of this really got me thinking about how I want to spend my life. I got to be up close and personal with grief and with death. I was really moved by the way that I saw the community come out and support each other. And I thought, what if we were able to do this not only in times of disaster? What if this is just how we responded always to take care of each other? And what would that require? What would that need? What would that even look like? This really got me thinking about how no matter what, there's really no amount of money that can keep us safe. There is always some type of healthcare catastrophe, some type of devastating situation where money is not going to protect us. if we actually shifted how resources were allocated, if we actually used the power of the state to create collective safety nets, how that is a way of keeping us all collectively safer, better cared for, living a better quality of life. And also how if we actually had a form of a collective safety net, even if we had socialized or universal health care, if we had access to free public education, if we had just the basic things that other countries have that provide for the needs of their citizens, we actually all benefit from that. We all are safer. We don't need to save as much money. We don't have to extract as much from the working class that runs our economy. And how, by the fact that I don't have to save as much for myself or as much to take care of someone I love, that allows me to have more energetic capacity to live the life that I want for myself. And the loved ones around me get to have that as well. It's something that benefits everybody. It made me realize that I wanted to spend my energetic capacity really working to build, or at least start sowing, these collective safety nets so that we all get to be able to meet our needs and live fulfilling lives. That was what got me thinking about my own access to privilege, my own access to wealth. These were things that I was thinking about already, but I wasn't really making the connection to how that connected to the money that I had in my bank account. I was just dissociating from the money and trying to hide this part of myself in organizing spaces. I didn't want to be known as someone who had parents who were wealthy or who had this high-paying job, because to me it felt like if that was true, then I don't belong in the movement. That was essentially some of the factors that led me to resource generation, where I started to get organized around my own access to wealth and class privilege. And resource generation really opened my own eyes to making money off of money and what it means to be part of the top 10%, and also how people who have access to wealth and class privilege need to be showing up in solidarity with the rest of the world and with social justice movements, and really using the power that we have access to further the work of social movements, of poor and working class people, of historically, systemically oppressed people. It also totally remade me think about what it looks like and feels like to be a part of the top 10% because of my parents' relationship to wealth, the stories that I was told, even though materially I was making an income that put me in the top 10%. I had oscillated classes and ascended classes throughout my life. I really thought that I was like an average middle class person. And it really made me rethink the stories that I had heard, the way that I saw those around me compare up and constantly be striving for more, even though the conditions that we're living in put us leaps and bounds ahead of an average person. And it just made me really rethink, like, oh, I actually do have this more unique position in society. I have much more economic power and also political power that comes from that. It really shifted my perspective and how I saw classism showing up just in society and in the day-to-day world. So I started to really interrogate my own wealth. From that came a lot of shifts. The first is that I really ramped up my giving. I started to give about 10% of my earned income away. At the time, I was making $150,000. So I was giving away about $15,000 a year. Over time, as I started to also interrogate how I wanted to be spending my energy, and as someone who was working in the tech sector, I realized that I don't want to spend my life's energy helping make supply chains better or helping build this technology that benefits like another mega conglomerate company. I want to spend my energy doing things that allow me to take care of the people that I love, doing things that allow me to show up for myself, for my beloveds, and for my community. So I went down this whole separate journey of both interrogating my wealth, but also interrogating what do I want to do for my livelihood. I did start realizing that I wanted to organize my people. I wanted to organize people who had access to power. And I started to realize how at the root of all of these things that are making our lives miserable, capitalism is really at the crux of all of it, is really the deepest belly of the beast, so to speak. Because in order for the system to function, it requires extraction. And for that extraction to happen, it's much easier to happen when you dehumanize people or treat things as externalities. That led me to think about, what if I can organize people who are already politicized and wanting to shift their power or wanting to shift their money or heal their legacy, their lineage, through the lens of repair, of reparations. Because I was in these communities where people were wanting to do that. And I also saw them getting stuck quite often, getting stuck in wealth being locked up in these irrevocable trusts and not having direct access to the wealth that's stewarded by a trustee or a family member or an inherited financial professional, or people who just didn't have community to even talk to or to ask for help because they're so isolated. And so I really viewed my role as someone who is able to start dismantling some of the systems of white supremacy, of colonialism, of imperialism, as someone who also wants to heal their own legacy and create a different story. I really viewed my role as getting my people organized, getting them unstuck, and helping them show up in right relationship. And so in order to do that, I needed to go on my own wealth redistribution and divestment journey. So I actually hired a values-aligned financial planner. Her name is Lisa Hodges. Shout out, Lisa. I'm going to link to her and her company Shift to Impact in the show notes. But through working with Lisa, I not only really understood the degree of my financial picture, but we really worked to create a plan to better align my wealth with my own values. And through that, I divested $150,000 from the stock market. I redistributed about $35,000 from that back into the hands of social movements, of grassroots organizations that are resisting the bad, building the new, and ultimately building collective power. I was able to identify what are the things in my life that I want to have. So I started to pick out these different goals that I had in mind for the life that I wanted and for the life that I hope to be able to share with those that I love. And through that, I was actually able to reinvest in community investments and in the solidarity economy, providing financing and capital that helps things like cooperatives, worker ownership, more affordable and decommodified housing, regenerative agriculture, and in projects that work to move assets into collective ownership and governance and getting them decommodified. The other piece of that is that these typically provide concessionary returns, so things that keep pace with inflation or maybe is a 0% return or a loan that could turn into a grant if it can't get paid back. It also means that this is patient capital, so capital that provides enough runway, multiple years, generally at least an election cycle, to be able to provide the financing and runway for these folks to get their feet under the ground, to be able to take the risks necessary to fulfill their vision and not have to worry about paying that back within a year or 2 years. Speaking from someone who's been in the startup world, to pay back money that quickly, it requires a high degree of extraction from yourself and from your workers to be able to pay back financed capital, especially one that is at an interest rate, especially interest rates these days. It's not realistic for some of these incredible solidarity economy projects. Our current financial system just doesn't work. And so that's a little bit of my story. There's a lot more there. There's a lot more I didn't get to. But hopefully that gives you a better idea of who I am and how I came into where I am now.
Thank you so much for listening to the Reimagine Wealth podcast. You can find resources and links from today's episode in the show notes. And if you enjoyed this episode, please like, review, subscribe, and share this with those in your community. If you'd like to support the show, you can become a paid member of my Substack, which allows me to sustain this work and have more episodes to share in the future. Again, links to all of that and more are in the show notes. And until next time, I'm sending you resilience and warmth, and thank you so much for tuning in.